If you're watching this video, I imagine it's because you're planning on writing a short film in the near future. Well, I recently went through files on my computer and discovered that in the last 5 years, I have written 50 different scripts. Of these 50 plus scripts, the vast majority were for shorts. I have learnt a lot about writing short films, and I figured you might be able to benefit from some of this learning so you don't make any of the many mistakes that I've made yourselves. Greetings one and all, welcome to the channel. If you are new here, my name is Matthew. I'm a filmmaker in the UK, and on this channel I like to talk about the craft of filmmaking, using film language, and just making there be more good shit in the world. Honestly, I just like helping facilitate the existence of good shit. So without further ado, I want to talk about 3 different, I'm going to call them structural elements of short film writing. I more just think about this as a decent way of starting, a decent way of ending, and a decent way of doing the main body of short films, like things to bear in mind. When writing the opening to a short film, I like to think about making sure I do a lot of non-exposition exposition, because there's always going to be an amount of stuff that the audience needs to know for the story to make sense. You need to know the nature of people's relationships, you need to know the situation that you find yourself in, and having people just come out and say that for the audience's benefit is incredibly boring and incredibly frustrating, and people will switch off very quickly if you do that. I personally love just diving into the story and letting the exposition kind of do itself as the story goes. I wrote and directed a short film called For Milo. It's only a minute long, but we open on a card being written. We see someone smiling as they write the card. We see that it's a get well soon card. From that, you have so much exposition that doesn't feel like exposition. You know that this person has a friend who is unwell, that they have fond memories of. They're not too worried about this person. Just based on the way they're acting, you can tell that it's like, this is all fine. I'm writing them a get well soon card. I care about them. I want them to get better. And all of that is the setup. All of that is basically exposition, but it's measured out so gently and carefully that it doesn't feel like you're being told these things. It feels like you're just discovering them as you watch. Another way of dealing with exposition is making sure that it's relevant to a present amount of tension. Now, you don't have to do this. Obviously, For Milo didn't have that tension in place, but it is just super effective. On Filmmaking, which is my own personal Bible, but it's by Alexander McKendrick, who is a director who mainly worked in the 50s and 60s. He says exposition is boring unless it is in the context of some present crisis or tension. This is so true. If the exposition that you're doing is not relevant to the stuff that is happening on screen right now, people are largely gonna tune it out, and then when they need to recall it and it's relevant again, they're just not gonna remember. For example, I use this technique in my short film Bounce Back, where you discover slowly but surely all the things that happened the previous night, but only through their relevance to the tension between the 2 people who are on screen from the very beginning of the film. It's also worth noting that the way in which you open a film is going to change a lot depending on where you imagine that film being shown. For example, if you want your film to do well on YouTube, you really need a solid, punchy opening 15 seconds. You need something really solid straight away that the audience can grab onto. There is a short film called Milk Teeth that I think does this really well. It has a very horrific opening 10 seconds that really grabs your attention, and then it just does the film for the rest of the film. But those opening 10-15 seconds really designed for that YouTube audience. There's a film I made as well called Better Than You, which I really like. I think it's still one of my favorite things that I've done, but it doesn't do the YouTube opening particularly well. It is very kind of slow to start before building up the tension quite well later on. And I wasn't particularly concerned with catering the film to the YouTube audience, but if I had been, I definitely would have needed to find a better way of doing those first 10-15 seconds. So once you've started your film, You then get onto the bulk of the film itself. And I think with short films, you actually have a lot of flexibility and a lot of scope to do a lot of different things. These kind of formulas and blueprints can be useful sometimes, but you don't always need to follow them to make something successful. However, what I would say is very, very important, and I've seen a lot of people do this badly before, particularly because I've worked with teenagers who are making their first short films, and something I see quite a lot is stories where characters don't make any decisions. This might take the form of them just wandering from place to place, or it might take the form of stuff happening to them and them reacting very passively. The bulk of the story needs to revolve around characters making decisions. This could be just one decision that they make in a bunch of different ways. I just finished shooting a short film where the central tension is whether or not a ghost is real, and the character basically decides to believe in the ghost and decides not to believe in the ghost in various different ways at different points in the film. But that's still very much his decision. He doesn't just passively observe the ghost being there. He takes action and either chooses to believe that the ghost is real or chooses to believe that the ghost is not real. You can also have a story that has a bajillion different decisions in a very, very short space of time. I love the work of David F. Sandberg. His short films in particular, stuff like Lights Out, is fantastic for this sort of thing because there are so many decisions that happen so quickly in Lights Out. There's the decision to flick the lights on and off whilst considering whether or not she can actually see what she thinks she can see. There's the decision to tape the light switch on, not leave the house, but just be like, okay, that's weird, I'm going to tape this. The decision to go back to bed. The decision to hide under the covers. So many decisions are taken, and that gives the narrative a sense of momentum that it just needs to function. Decisions will also lead to change, either internal or external, and that's what all good stories are built on. By the end of the story, something will be different, even if nothing is different if someone has made a decision. By which I mean, if someone decides to do something and fails and the status quo is restored, there will still be a change internally in that character because they have made a decision. Decisions just mean change, internal or external, but change nonetheless. I think this lack of change is why the two time travel films that I've made don't quite land right, because nothing's different at the end. It's very difficult to come up with an ending for a film like that. By its very nature, it goes on forever. It's a time loop. Things can change, but then you have to end up at the very, very start again. It's a bit of a tricky thing to manage. Something else that a great ending has, for a short film in particular, is what I like to think of as the audiovisual full stop, which I've talked about in a video before. But essentially, the audiovisual full stop is just an image and a sound that you can end with. I think of all the things that I've done, for Milo has the best one of these, because she literally drops the card on the floor and then you end on flowers and card close up on the floor. That's just a solid image, and the sound of the flowers being dropped is great audio, ka-thunk. It just leaves the audience with something very solid and tangible. I did a film that ends with a hand reaching out of a computer screen. I did one where there's a monster that lunges for the camera, which admittedly the visual effects on that could have been better, but it's still, as an idea, a solid audio-visual full stop. In Bounce Back, which I talked about earlier, I didn't end up shooting something that kind of functioned that way. It was in the script that he was meant to get out of the car and close the door behind him, and a closing door, fantastic thing to end on. Ka-chung. The meaning of a closing door is very resonant, but also the ka-chunk of a door closing is great. So what I ended up doing in that film, because I just forgot to shoot him getting out of the car and closing the door, what I ended up doing was taking the noise of the other character opening the door, overlaying that with him making a little move that looks like he's opening the door, and cutting to black on that. And that gave the relevant kind of ka-tung, chung, satisfying end, like an ending. If the short films that I watched that 16, 17-year-olds were making all had those elements, like exposition that doesn't feel like exposition, a lot of decisions being made and something changing across the bulk of the story, and an ending that has a solid sense of finality to it, I feel like all of those students would be getting like A's for their work. Absolutely, 100%. I hope that some of this stuff has been useful to you. If you want more, I'm absolutely going to be making more videos, so feel free to subscribe. I also have a playlist of me talking about filmmaking stuff here, and a playlist of my short films underneath that as well. Some of the points that I talked about in this video, I was considering expanding and making their own video entirely, so if you would be interested in that, let me know in the comments. I'm terrible at saying goodbyes, so I guess I'll just see you next time.